move on to the next item on the agenda, which is HB 111, eminent domain by amendments by myself, and I'll ask Representative Snow to take the chair as Chair Pro Tem while I present my bill.
Okay, Representative Perry, we'll turn to you for presentation of House Bill 111. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Pro Tem. First thing I need to do, as a member of the committee, I'd like to make a motion that we delete title and body House Bill 111 and replace it with first substitute House Bill 111, which you should all have in front of you. I can speak to that if you need me to, and I can just kind of explain what's happened. Is this has been a long, drawn-out process, and once we get it substituted, I'll even be possibly amending it further from there. But to start with the first substitute, we started and we had some things that, as we discussed with the various interested parties, that we made enough significant changes. Obviously, we had to substitute the bill. And as we go into this first substitute, I'll give you the history behind it. But there was, like I said, there's significant changes that have occurred. This has been brought to me by the person to my right, Mr. Craig Call, who was our state land ombudsman and is a constituent of mine. And he and I have worked quite extensively on this subject and have been trying to come together. And what passion for me came about was, number one, as a state representative when I first got in, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a state land ombudsman. And as I got to know Craig and know that what he'd done, and I said, this is something that the citizens need to know, because as I ran for office and got in as a representative, I had citizens coming to me who were disturbed about cases of eminent domain and about how they were handled and the way things went down. And with my history in law enforcement, and being a supervisor in law enforcement, I get this because quite often I get people who come and complain about something an officer did, and then I go to the officer and I hear the officer's side of the story, and generally what I end up finding out is the truth is somewhere in the middle. And that's what this bill is really all about. I'm trying to get to the middle and trying to figure out why we would have so many people complaining about the seriousness and the problem with eminent domain, other than the fact that private property is sacred, and I totally get that. But where we've gone with it as a government, as a state, and where we probably should be as a government state. So with the first substitute, this is all brought together as a method to try and get to a compromise. I think there's some really good things in this bill that we need to move forward with, and we've taken some things out, we've added some things, and that's where we're at with the first substitute. So with that, I would put it for any questions and put it out to get the first substitute in, and then we can go from there.
All right. Thank you, Representative. So as I understand, your motion is to replace House Bill 111 with first substitute House Bill 111. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's the motion before the body. Any discussion on the motion? Representative Arendt.
I prepared reading the original bill, and now we've got a substitute. You said there are a lot of changes. Is there any way you could give me a little feel for what's in this before I'm voting to replace it? I don't feel like I have a good understanding of what's there.
If I can defer to Mr. Call, I'll let him kind of explain, because he's been, like I said, working with me quite significantly on that. So,
thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm a citizen. I used to be a state employee. The quick answer is we came up with a list of things that really we thought ought to be addressed, and they were talked about somewhat. You may remember last year, in a setting very similar to this one, Representative Newell brought in an eminent domain bill to extend the right of eminent domain to those in the oil and gas industry. And Representative King in particular made an eloquent speech about issues like this acquisition process. That bill included in its original draft some changes to the acquisition process, and those were taken out because both the current ombudsman and I stood up and said, you know, you've got to think carefully about the language you choose to go into these bills. So it was promised that that would be put in an interim study, and yet it wasn't. So we went ahead and came up with some language. I generated it with Representative Perry, hoping that we could jumpstart the process this time. It is complicated, and there are a lot of people who care about this very deeply who are involved in this on a regular basis. So we've just decided that, understanding that the good faith interest of those who are involved in this full-time, that we could perhaps in the interim work through some of these issues and come up with a better consensus and a better solution. Not technically, we think we know what the best thing is for property owners. The specter we have is the Attorney General's office and others that lawyer these things dramatically, saying that there are unintended consequences of some of the things we may want to do, and they ought to be carefully prepared. So we have tried to address in the original bill and in the substitute bill issues like what happens when an entity trespasses instead of using eminent domain. How do we make acquisition agents accountable for misrepresentations and misconduct? How do we make sure that we deal with uneconomic remnants that might be left over when part of the land is taken? And what do we do about other ways to inform property owners? The original beginning of the bill came when it became apparent that some condemnors, some who acquire property, had convinced a couple of judges that all the negotiation procedures in part of the code were not relevant unless you relocate somebody. So these people were able to convince a court, a judge, there was no duty to get an appraisal. There was no duty to let the property owner walk the property with the appraiser. There was no duty not to acquire uneconomic remnants and things like that, because it was in an act called the Relocation Act, and they weren't relocating. Now, for reasons that are too complicated to explain, I don't agree with that. But we've got some issues to settle, but it just appears to us, from dealing with all those who care so much about this, that the best way to proceed is to put those on the table, and this time, this interim, really dig into it. I'm pleased to note, Representative Arendt, that you were there in 2004 when we did this before, and we came up with a rewrite of the eminent domain code that set the stage for dispute resolution, and with that bill passed both houses without a single negative vote. And I'm hoping we can make some progress like that this time, although I certainly don't expect a consensus. But that's why we decided to maybe take a breath and step back. Although I regret now it's 2 years before we get a real substantive revision of the negotiation processes that we anticipated we might be able to bring to you now. Sorry for the long answer to a
That's
short
helpful.
question.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Call, the staff has asked if you mind stating your name for the record and who you represent, please.
My name is Craig Call, and I represent myself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion to the motion? Reminding the committee the motion before us is to substitute House Bill 111 with first substitute. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. So we now have first substitute House Bill 111 before us. We'll turn the time back to you, Representative Perry.
Thank you. As part of my negotiations discussion with this bill, and now we got the first substitute before us, there's one other, I need to make another amendment at this point, and that amendment would be to strike lines 14 through 16 on the front page, strike lines 21 through 25 on that front page, and then we would strike lines 168 through 176, and we would strike, I'll back up, 168 through 176, and then we would strike lines 427 to line 451, the end of the bill. And I can talk about that as well.
What was the last one again?
It would be line 427 through 451.
So that's your motion to strike all of those lines from the text of first substitute House Bill 111. So let me see if we have those. That would be all of lines 14 through 16, all of lines 21 through 25. It's on the first page. all of lines 427 through 451. And am I missing one, or is that it?
Yes, also lines 168 through 176 on page 6.
168 through 176. That's the motion that's before us. Any discussion on the motion? Representative Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't like it. There's like 4 words left in your bill.
You're right.
After you delete that out. Well, you're a soft negotiator, I guess. I don't know who was working you over the last couple of days, but...
And I've invited many of those people to be here because I definitely want to bring this bill to this committee. I want you to understand that these folks have all committed to be part of the ongoing discussion in the interim. Their concerns that they brought to my attention were that forcing this through in this manner could have consequences that we as a state may not want to go down at this point. Like my friend here, Mr. Calls, explained, it's frustrating because I do want to see it go forward. But I also don't want to do something that's going to harm the process. I want it done right, and that's why I was willing to put this forward. But I can tell you, if we do, it will go to. I'm going to insist it be an interim and it be a top priority in the interim, so that by next session the words are right, and that we're not going to have a huge battle and fight. That this bill will go through, and that we will fix this problem for the citizens of the state.
Well, I appreciate you going on record saying that, but let me ask you just a quick question then about the remainder of the bill. So it appears that the only thing left is that the ombudsman will provide information, and I'm seeing on line 340 or 354 and 360, there's the elimination of a development.
Correct.
And that's basically all that's left.
That's
right?
what would basically be the gist of the bill, is to basically bring the ombudsman information forward, make sure people understand that they know that person's there to help them. And then another big issue is, I don't know how it happened, how we got it in there, but we've allowed developers to declare eminent domain. And by taking those 2 lines out, that may seem insignificant, but it is significant. It's removing somebody that should not be declaring eminent domain, and that's developers. So if nothing else, that's why I said I feel this is important to get this part, if nothing else, through this without, I think that part I've got unanimous support on. But there is no reason a developer ought to be declaring eminent domain. I cannot see that happening, and that's why I was willing to make that negotiation, because I think this bill is that important to get that part out this session no matter what, and not have the whole bill go down in flames. So,
Thank you, Representative Christensen.
Thank you. Representative Hutchings hit spot on the things that I wanted to mention. I was groping to see what's left. And I just wanted to caution you, I'm not so sure you should do that. Just take them one by one. Just leaving the words development in doesn't accomplish the intended purpose, because it really goes to the heart of the Kelo decision, which is so controversial. But what happens is a developer can't literally, under the Constitution, come forward and claim authority to exercise eminent domain. The municipalities do it for them. They go in for subdivision approvals or whatever the case might be. That was the Kelo case, and so they broadly interpreted the public purpose. You're only supposed to, under the Constitution, be able to take property if it's for a demonstrated public purpose. You're going to build a highway, you're going to build something that's legitimately public, and then you pay just compensation. And they typically go in for what they seek as a friendly condemnation, because it takes a long time. You could stretch it out. But then you had language in here now that puts in code severance damages, which is huge. That's the remaining property calculation. I could see maybe possibly striking, lines 430, where you're saying, well, they don't have to get the appraisal. Who gets the appraisal? But I think that to say that by putting in a development, it does do something. It does slow down. It should deter the municipalities from doing it, but when we take it out, they can still come in and try to argue case law. And so it needs some language in here. So I think you're on track to do very good things with what you have, and to make those amendments and pull back if you decide you want to refer it to a task force or this or that. But I think you can amend as you go, but I'm not so sure that the amendment that they've proffered to you is really in the spirit of what the ombudsman's trying to accomplish. What I was going to ask you about inverse condemnation, but I don't think, Mr. Call, I don't think we really quite go that far, do we, with the language as far as how you could apply the proposed language there as well. So I guess I'm disappointed in the amendment, and just concerned that maybe they've proffered to you that by leaving the deletion of development in that they've done something, but unless you could count on them to stipulate that they're not going to try to use the Kelo decision or something else. But I don't believe currently, Mr. Call, am I mistaken? I don't believe a developer could come in and try to claim the right to condemn in their own, have standing to do it themselves. They could try to convince the municipality, if that language was in code, that they qualify, but even then it has to be for a legitimate public purpose. And as you know, the problem with Kelo was they did it so broadly, they thought that just the economic incentive of tax revenues and redevelopment was tacitly public. And that's where we've gone so far afield. So your thoughts maybe on that?
If I may.
Yeah.
The amendment that was made 3 years ago amended a part of the code that talked about private rights of eminent domain. It used to say that you could condemn land for access to a home, a residence, or a farm. The word development was put in there, and the result of that is specifically exactly what you're afraid would happen. The developer has a private right of condemnation without going through the city. And that's what we'd like to take out. Okay. We think that's inappropriate. The Kelo case, which was probably the most publicly criticized opinion in the history of the Supreme Court, even outrageous decisions that we now look back on as being horrendous from the 19th century were not unpopular at the time. But the Kelo case, the polls showed 80 to 85% of Americans thought it was the wrong decision. But what the Kelo case said is the legislature is going to decide when to use eminent domain. The courts won't. So here we have a case where the Utah legislature needs to step up. To address Representative Hutchins' question about, for example, this appraisal for trespass, and I'll use a harsh word here, if the government wants to acquire your property and they go through the process of acquisition, you have the right to involve the ombudsman, and the ombudsman can order another appraisal at the property at the condonor's expense. But if you just trespass, if you just go occupy the property and lay your pipe, you don't have that duty. You don't have to do another appraisal. And the ombudsman is limited to just arbitration, not mediation. So we tried several ways to fix this. We offered, for example, a proposal where if there's a trespass, then that condemnor is going to pay 150% of just compensation. Or there was a proposal, if there's a trespass, they're going to have to pay legal fees. And finally, we came down to just saying, okay, just do an appraisal. That's all we're asking. If you trespass and the ombudsman thinks it's appropriate, just do an appraisal. And there are those who said, no, that you don't know what you're dealing with, we're not ready for that. If we put it back into interim, and if it comes to this committee, my guess is we'll get a whole lot better solution than the one that's here, because we need your help. And on this committee, I mean, just look around the room at the people who are here and the good you could do. It's interesting, this book that the ombudsman publishes that you have a copy of, the first draft of this was written by Representative Hall's father. And each of you have your own experience you bring to this. The problem I have is when I get in a room with 14 or 15 convenor and their representatives, it looks like we're trying to do something by majority vote. It's the only entity that can really resolve these issues is the legislature. There is no property rights group. There is no group of property owners. There isn't an entity that can come and champion this cause. You are the ones who represent the individuals, and this is exactly where it needs to be. And my belief is if we get to the committee in the interim and deal with this as we did in 2004 with Carlene Walker carrying the bill, that we can come up with some really good solutions.
Mr. Chair, one follow-up, if I might.
Okay.
Just an observation. Severance damages is huge, and that's just for the, if someone takes the front end of the horse and leaves you at the back end of the horse, you've lost something, okay? And so if they just get an appraisal, but what happens is as public entities go out and inquire, whether they mean to or not, they take advantage of varying degrees of sophistication of the people that they're dealing with. And if someone has an attorney and knows that there's such a thing as severance damages, they will get not only the appraised value of the property they're taking, but you'll get an additional premium above and beyond for the diminished value of the remainder of your property. But if you don't know that, they'll just go along and they may not even get an appraisal. They'll just say they'll surrender to the government and they'll just do this and they'll do that. And there's not full disclosure and people aren't adequately protected. So putting that doctrine, if you will, that important legal entitlement in code would be a wonderful service to the people. And it would ensure that you don't get a misleading appraisal where it's only on the portion of the property that they're taking. If you own 15 acres and they take 8 and leave you with 7, but all of a sudden now you back up to a busy road that wasn't there before and you can't use the property or whatever the case might be. So that's important. And then secondly, I just want to lament the fact that we've created the property ombudsman, but in some ways you're in the funeral business because our property rights have been so obliterated that you go in and tell them what should be but isn't. And I just wanted to say statewide that property rights are so devastated and so overdue for protection. And so creating your office is wonderful, but many times you just have to bear the bad news. And we need to try to restore property rights and give you the resources to help the people know what they have and exercise what they're entitled to. Thank you.
If I could mention, the severance damage provision is still in code and has not been adjusted by this. It's a little clarified by the language that we're not advancing, but it's not by any means eliminated by not having
You don't
this.
feel we're diminished by
No.
by losing this language here? Thank you. That's a good assurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative King to the motion to substitute.
To amend.
I'm sorry, to amend. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to reserve the right to make a substitute motion.
Certainly, it's in order.
Let me say this. This is an important issue, and I appreciate the fact that we've got the good representative, Representative Perry, who's presented it. I appreciate very much Mr. Call's work on this. He cares about it. He's very knowledgeable. I feel strongly this is an important issue. But I got to say, we delayed from Wednesday the consideration of HB 114. We asked these folks to come back. They're here. We are going to end at 10. We're going to end before 10 one way or the other. I feel strongly that we need to move on. And so I want to make sure that these folks who have come many times at a long distance at inconvenience for the second day get heard. They need to be heard on that bill. So my substitute motion is to, I don't know how you're going to receive this, Representative Perry, but it's to refer this bill to interim for study and continue to discuss it there.
Thank you, Representative. There's a substitute motion then before the committee that would refer substitute House. Excuse me, Representative, I'm advised by staff that the appropriate motion would be either to return this to rules or to hold.
All right. Thank you. I'd move that we hold.
So the motion, substitute motion that's before us on first substitute House Bill 111 is that the first substitute be held. Discussion on the motion. Representative Hutchings.
Just a clarification on what hold means. I'm assuming that goes back to the chair's list. The chair can put it on a future agenda at any time they want.
That's correct.
Okay. In that case, then I'm going to support that motion because I think Representative King is absolutely right. We're dragging this way out, and we need to let these people speak. So I think we need to move, not this bill particularly, but we were supposed to be done with both of these about 30 minutes ago. So I think we need to get to the public and then take the time to readdress this. I think we've made some good steps with it. I think it definitely does need to be heard, and I'll support the bill when it comes back. But I do think we need to get to the public.
Thank you. Representative Christensen to the substitute motion.
I just wanted to express thanks for the clarification because I've seen holding construed as dead, and it would have been more appropriate for the intent to be that we move to the next item, which would have had the effect of, just holding it, and the good bill sponsor is saying that he's okay with that. We need to just digest this amendment. So as long as we understand that we're not killing the bill, we're just simply moving it on the agenda, and would like to hear from the bill sponsor as to that aspect.
Thank you, Representative. Back to the sponsor for your position on the substitute motion.
I appreciate where you, and I agree with you. I think we need to get to that next item. I believe that knowing the chair and the vice chair, I think we can work on this, and this is not going to leave the committee, obviously, and we can possibly come up with a solution. That I still think that it's important to get the part that I mentioned through, the developer part, out this session. I am totally committed to putting the rest of the bill to an interim study if we go that direction as far as the amendment I was talking about. So perhaps between now and the time we meet next, I could possibly do that, so I wouldn't be opposed to that. We could take
Thank you, Representative. And Representative King, sponsor the motion.
Waive.
Thank you. Summation is waived. The matter is back before the Committee on Substitute Motion to hold first substitute House Bill 111. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the matter passes unanimously. Chair Pro Tem will turn the chair back to Representative Perry.
All right. Thank you, Representative Snow, for taking care of that. Representative Green will first, just spoke with you. We'll first go back. We've already been presented the bill, so I want to go back to the committee real quickly, see if there's anybody who has any questions before I take it to the public, because that's really where we left off the other day. If seeing none, what my plan is here for the public. What I would like to do is I want to give the public an opportunity to speak to this. So if there are those who are in favor of the bill and want to speak in favor of it, I want them to be on this side of the room, and we'll have a sign-up sheet over here by our Sergeant at Arms, where as you come forward to speak, I'll have you sign in on that side first, and then you'll be able to go up and speak so we don't delay the opportunity to speak there. If they're against, if you'll be over on this side of the room, and what we're going to try to do is go for and against, and we'll give everybody an opportunity to speak. We'll start with a for, then we'll do an against, and if we don't have an even number, we'll still give the people that want to speak an opportunity to speak to this bill, and we'll see where it takes us at this point. So we'll start with a for at this point from the public. If you'll come forward, sign in, state your name, and then we'll go from there. Lights on. You can use this one. Perfect. Okay, let's see. Yeah, we got to get you on there, Mr. Boyack. There we go. Got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Connor Boyack with Libertas Institute. Wanted to speak briefly to this bill. I know we got many people. What I want to reference and discuss briefly is the so-called constitutional note. I know that there was a lot of concern that was raised in the last meeting. And for context, at least, it's not the constitutional note. This is simply a legislative review note. We call it a constitutional note. But what this is one attorney's opinion. Probably the attorney's colleagues as well have consensus on the note. But attorneys disagree all the time. By no means is this the law of the land and the interpretation by which the committee should take action. In fact, the sponsor of this bill, who likely disagrees with most, if not all, of that legislative review note, is himself an attorney. The substituted bill has an amended constitutional note, which I actually applaud because it rectifies a glaring omission that was in the original legislative review note. As you may recall, there were three portions of the legislative review note. There was an issue with the supremacy clause, an issue with the commerce clause, and the issue with the chilling effect that the criminalization would have had, and of course with the amendment that was removed in the previous meeting. So now we're left with the issues supposedly of its constitutionality in relation to the supremacy and commerce clauses. Well, in the first legislative review note, the attorney provided some court cases to claim that this would violate the supremacy clause because federal law trumps state law. Period. some. And when quoting the Supremacy Clause, the glaring omission was that they left out the key part of the Supremacy Clause that has direct relevance to the bill in question. It read, this Constitution, ... shall be the supreme law of the land. Well, of course, the operating part of that Supremacy Clause is what they omitted, and what thankfully was included in this next version of the Legislative Review Note, which says that this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof are the law of the land. And that is the entire question with HB 114. Are federal gun control laws that are blatantly, in my view, inconsistent with the Constitution, do they inherently trump state laws which may contradict them? And that is why HB 114, I believe, has been brought before this committee. There are many court cases that are provided which I think have long-standing precedent but flawed precedent. This bill would, I think, provide the legislature an opportunity to interpose between an encroaching federal government and the liberty of its citizens. I note that 2 members of this committee who were in the legislature when Senator Dayton's SB 11 was passed overwhelmingly by the legislature did in fact vote for that bill, which was substantially equivalent. It also raised constitutional concerns. It had the same effect that Representative Green's HB 114 would have in conflicting with and contradicting the established federal law. So I simply want to raise that point that the supposed unconstitutionality of this bill is not in fact true in our view, and the court cases that are provided as precedent are flawed and deserve to be challenged. I know in closing there's been concern about allocating money to defend a supposedly unconstitutional bill. This legislature allocates all sorts of money for things that routinely and institutionally violate the proper role of government. Why not allocate money to defend the right to keep and bear arms, which 2 constitutions that govern the citizens of this state declare shall not be infringed? I can think of no better use for taxation than to defend this right. Thank you.
Any questions? Not. Thank you, Mr. Boyack. We'll take somebody against.
Are we supposed to sign, Mr. Chair, in this paper?
If you've signed on this paper, as you signed in, we're good.
That's sufficient.
That's fine.
Good morning. My name is Sandy Kruger. I'm representing myself and my family, some neighbors, friends, my water aerobics instructor, my dentist, my dental hygienist. The point I'm trying to make is a lot of people are talking about this law, and they feel the same way I do, but they can't be here today. We look at HB 114, Second Amendment Preservation Act, as extremism. It goes beyond reasonable actions. This legislation is unreasonable because even though your own Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel suggests that there's a high possibility that this legislation would be held unconstitutional, it's still drafted and proposed. As an outsider looking in at the legislative process, just common sense would tell me if a law would be unconstitutional, you as lawmakers would see this as a red flag and step away from it and move on to something that we feel is more important, something that would matter and maybe make a difference. As taxpayers, we would rather see our limited funds being spent in so many other ways than on legal fees defending an unconstitutional law. I respect how valuable your time is, representatives. You have more to accomplish in 45 days than I think is humanly possible. I thank you for the minute you've given me of your time, and I appreciate you letting me express my concerns and my frustrations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kruger. Next one against. Or for, sorry, for.
Yeah, Ronald Mortensen, I'm representing myself. Questions have been raised about whether committee members should support a bill that has a constitutional note that reads, there is a high probability that this legislation would be held unconstitutional. And I just note that after quite a few sessions up here, I've noted that members of the legislators have frequently voted for bills with constitutional notes. For example, in 2011, a majority of the legislature voted for and the governor signed 2 Utah compact bills, HB 116 and HB 469, that had constitutional notes. HB 116's note said there's a high probability that the court would find that portions of this bill is unconstitutional. HB 69, which was brought by Representative Dougal, said there's a high probability that a court would find that portions of this bill are unconstitutional, and both of them passed with large majorities. In 2010, as Mr. Boyack mentioned, members of the legislature passed and the governor signed SB 11, the Utah State Made Firearms Protection Act. The legislative review note said this legislation is highly likely to be held to be unconstitutional under the United States Constitution's Supremacy Clause. In 2012, the legislature passed and the governor signed HB 511, eminent domain of federal land. It had the following legislative review note. In short, a political subdivision of the state has no standing to exercise eminent domain. Now, I could go on, but the point here is that legislators of both parties often passes, and the governor often signs legislation that their own attorneys have deemed to have a high probability of being held unconstitutional because of the importance of the legislation. So I would submit that because this legislation is designed to secure Second Amendment rights, that it is at least of equal importance as HB 116, HB 469, SB 11, and HB 511. Therefore, I would encourage you to pass it out with a favorable recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mortensen. Next against.
Thank you. Jean Hill with the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City. And I will not say the same things I said 2 days ago on HB 76, though those comments also still apply to HB 114. I just do want to add, I have been sitting in social services appropriations listening to lots of stories of people who need serious assistance from the state. Lots of concern with that committee about where the money is going to come from. To waste the money on this is, again, it goes against everything that we claim to stand for in this state. We should be putting our money into things that will help people, such as Medicaid expansion, and not into lawsuits that we know we're going to lose. This isn't how we participate in our government system. We participate by petitioning our government, not by passing laws that are clearly unconstitutional. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Next one, 4.
Jason Christensen, representing myself. I thank all of you for this time in your lives to serving the public will. I thank you for allowing me to speak. I fully support this bill. I fully support the reasoning that Representative Green put out, but may I also exercise the words of the father of the Constitution, James Madison, in regards to this bill and your responsibility as a state legislature. The resolution, having taken this view of the federal compact, proceeds to infer that in case of deliberation, palatable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the said compact, the states who are parties thereto have the right and are in duty bound to interpose for arresting the progress of the evil, and for maintaining within the respective limits the authorities, rights, and liberties appertaining to them. It appears to your committee to be a plain principle founded in common sense, illustrated by common practice, and essential to the nature of compacts, that where resort can be had to no tribunal superior to the authority of the parties themselves must be the rightful judges in the last resort. Whether the bargain made has been pursued or violated, the Constitution of the United States was formed by the sanction of the states, given by each in its sovereign capacity. It adds to the stability and dignity as well as to the authority of the Constitution, and that it rests on this legitimate and solid foundation, the states. Then, being the parties to the constitutional compact and in their sovereign capacity, it follows a necessity, and there can be no tribunal above their authority to decide in the last resort whether the compact made by them be violated, and consequently that as the parties to it, they must themselves decide in the last resort such questions as may be of sufficient magnitude to require the into possession. Madison, according to the father of the Constitution, this bill is constitutional. The states do have the right to do this. And I encourage you to do what this very committee did 2 years ago when the former Representative Carl Wimmer passed a similar bill of nature opposing Obamacare, which ended up being beneficial to the state, allowing us to opt in or opt out of that egregious act to the Constitution. I encourage you to adhere to your oaths of office to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America and the Constitution of the state of Utah, and I encourage you to pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Do I have another one again? Let's see, against. All right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, your own legal
Will you
counsel...
state your name, please?
My name
who you're
is Stephen
representing.
Gunn. Forgive
Thank
me. G-U-N-N. Your own legal counsel has informed you that the bill is almost certainly unconstitutional because it violates the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which reads, "This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof shall be the supreme law of the land, and judges in every state shall be bound thereby." The bill violates Article 6, the Supremacy Clause, by prohibiting agents of the federal government from enforcing, quote, "any act, law, rule, or regulation of the federal government." That's in line 84. Relating to a personal firearm owned or manufactured in the state of Utah. Indeed, at lines 50 and 51, the bill declares that state laws concerning firearms, quote, "shall enjoy legal primacy within this state over any and all conflicting federal laws." Primacy is really the same thing as supremacy. So this bill says that state law is supreme. The U.S. Constitution says that federal law is supreme. A very blatant disregard for the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. The preamble to HB 114, lines 44 to 48, declares that the bill is intended to prevent the enforcement of any federal statutes which this legislature believes violate the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. In doing so, the bill adopts a doctrine known as nullification. It's the legal theory that a state has the right to nullify or invalidate any law which the state deems to be unconstitutional. The theory has been rejected by the U.S. Supreme Court in at least 3 cases, including a case in which the doctrine was used to block school desegregation. HB 114 attempts to prevent the enforcement of hypothetical federal gun control laws based on the theory that they violate the Second Amendment. In other words, HB 114 attempts to nullify federal law by declaring it to be unenforceable in this state. The bill also seeks to prevent enforcement of presently non-existent federal statutes banning specific types of weapons. Although the targeted weapons are not specifically named by the bill, how can they be when the federal statute has not yet been adopted? Presumably the type of assault weapon used in the Sandy Hook and Aurora Theater massacres will be shielded from federal regulation by the state of Utah. And why should they be shielded? Because the sponsor apparently believes that the Second Amendment protects them from regulation. The problem is that the courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court in the Heller decision, disagree. The courts say that the banning of assault rifles does not violate the Second Amendment. And I have prepared a packet of documents, including a brief description of those cases for the sponsor, which you can give to the members of the committee if you so desire. The greatest problem with this bill is that it rejects a fundamental principle of our form of government, the rule of law. It's the principle that informs us that even if we don't like a law, we will obey it until it can be struck down by the courts or repealed by the legislature. By contrast, HB 114 tells our citizens that because some of them, and perhaps some of you, don't like federal gun control laws, the state of Utah can interfere with the enforcement of those laws. The message of the bill is that if a gun owner doesn't like a firearms law, he can disregard it. And a few extremists will understand the bill to say that if they don't like a gun law, they can resist by its enforcement by force. The bill rejects the rule of law, and you should reject the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Next, 4.
My name's Stephanie Kearns. I'm here representing myself. Thank you all for taking the time to hear what I have to say. I'm for this amendment. I think that it addresses a lot of things that are very concerning to a lot of Utahns. However, my concern for coming up here is with the Amendment 1 that was passed. I think that that does not support the rest of the bill. I don't feel like it supports Utahns. Your concerns were about confrontation at someone's door between feds and police. However, without the support of a penalty for this law, that leaves anyone who is being confronted by these feds over this law doesn't have the support of the police. So if we can't expect to have protection at our door from the police, then what does that leave us? That leaves us with a criminal at our door trying to come in, and I don't think that that's fair. I think that if you're going to break the law, you should be held accountable, and just because it's your job doesn't give you an excuse to break the law. So I feel Amendment 1 was passed without consideration. So, again, I'm for this law. If you'll all support it and support Utahns by supporting it, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kearns. Do we have any other against? Well, yes, I've got, okay.
I wasn't going to speak initially. My name is Mary Ann Martindale. I'm with Alliance for a Better Utah, but I've sort of moved to after watching this for a little bit. I'm struck by the inconsistencies that I see in these committee meetings. So we have, on one hand, we have this legislative review note, which is extensive. The first one was 400 words longer than the actual bill file, stating that it was going to be found unconstitutional and that it would not hold hold up to legal muster. And, you know, we hear a lot of testimony, a lot of people saying, you know, well, that's not valid. We decide that we have attorneys on the panel and we've looked at it ourselves and we've interpreted that that's not actually valid. When the other day I'm in a committee hearing where another representative is presenting a bill that also has a legislative review note that supports his bill, there are several speakers during that testimony talking about why they disagree with that legislative review note, and they're dismissed out of hand because they're said, I'm sorry, but the legislative review note, we go with that. That's a staff that supports us, that provides that information for us. It's a responsibility that they do to give us good, valid input on whether or not a law is going to be, whether a bill is going to be constitutional. So you can take that or you cannot take that. Clearly, it falls on the whims of the committee members whether they actually like the bill or not. And then the second inconsistency that I want to point out, and unfortunately the good chair, Representative McKiff, is not here today, but the other day he said, you know, I feel like as a representative that it's my duty to go with the will of the people or to follow really what the people want. And I would remind you of HB 477, Grandma, and I would also remind you of the sex ed bill last year and remind you that that also is not something that is consistently done up here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one, 4.
Thank you for your attention, and I'm for this bill.
State your name and who you're representing, please.
David Crozier, I'm representing myself, or the people of Utah, I'd like to think. Long debated is the right to bear arms for personal protection. Cases such as home defense, muggings, personal attacks, and mass shootings are all legitimate reasons for you to own and carry publicly a firearm to set the odds of survival towards your favor. But I implore you to see that the greatest threats stem not from your neighbors or a lone gunman, but from the malicious intents permeating from corrupt government, both foreign and domestic. The product of gun control is summed up in history, and the equation is mass death and a dark legacy of oppression. The opposition to tyranny with words and ideals alone is fierce, but it is a cat's meow compared to the lion's roar it can be when backed by rifles and bullets, and a free people united with the discipline to wield such tools. Among a seemingly endless consensus concerning dictators and gun control, I find this quote that follows encompasses their insidious, unanimous mindset. All political power stems from the barrel of a gun. The Communist Party must command all the guns. That way, no guns can ever be used to command the party. This is the quote that is enshrined on the gravestones of over 30 million dead Chinese who perished horribly under Mao's bloody reign of terror. Would they have stood a chance if armed? Perhaps, or at least they would have died fighting. This threat is not gone. The world hasn't changed. We are not any more enlightened now than we were then. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party is still excuse me. The Communist Party is still offing its citizens in record numbers and coincidentally still poses a massive threat to us here in America more now than ever. Death by government is a real threat. It's called democide, and it's the murder of any person or people by a government, including genocide, politicide, and mass murder. Governments are guilty of murder if they are responsible in a reckless and wanton way for the loss of life, as incarcerating people in camps where they may soon die of malnutrition, unattended disease, forced labor, physical attacks, or deporting them into wastelands where they may die rapidly from exposure and disease. The death toll from democide is far greater than the death toll from war. In the last century alone, there have been over 250 million victims of democide. Make no mistake, these are the numbers, the murders of non-combative people by their government.
Mr. Crozier, we've got several people needing to talk when you're going on. We
Sure.
need to wind up here.
6 times as many people have died unarmed by the hands of governments than in battle. Political mass murder grows increasingly common as political power becomes unconstrained. At the other end of the scale, where power is diffused, checked, and balanced, political violence is a rarity. The more power a regime has, the more likely people will be killed by that regime. This is a major reason for promoting freedom and acting to preserve the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights and state sovereignty. Concentrated political power is the most dangerous thing on earth, and without a well-armed public, there is little chance to stem the tide of tyranny. Without weapons of war in the hands of peaceful
Okay, Mr.
law...
Crozier, you got to finish. We've got these other people that need to have a chance to talk.
Okay. Well, I'm for 114.
Thank you. Do you have anybody else against? Okay. You please come forward. This is 4. State your name and who you represent.
Kyle Crozier, and I represent myself, and I'd like to thank all patriots in this great nation. I come before you as your brother, friend, neighbor, fellow American, and Utahn. I would rather live a life of peace, happiness, prosperity, and love than ever raise one limb or tool against one of my over 6 billion family members that inhabit this earth. I love each and every person that I see. I do my very best each and every day to live a life of peace and happiness. Lately, gun owners like myself are demonized along with our tool, a gun, and that is all it is, a tool. A hammer can be used many times over to create malicious acts, and it is the ill intent of the person behind the hammer or the gun or whatever tool. We will never remove that. We will always have that. And I'd like to also bring up the point of democide because it's very real. After 9/11, we have seen in our country a really horrific stream of events. We have gone through a lot as Americans, and it has upset us emotionally and swayed us in ways that don't work. We have seen the passing of the Patriot Act, AUMF, NDAA, the removal of the Posse Comitatus Act, and the list goes on. After a few shootings, the government is pushing to disarm us. It looks light and friendly right now, but is incrementalism. And they're pushing to disarm every good citizen while they are arming themselves more heavily each and every day. We are already outclassed when it comes to technology. We are asking for a mere tool, mere tools known as guns to defend ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Crozier. We need to have these, I've got to let these people speak. I know there's lots of people who came, and we'd like to have them have the opportunity. So you just
I understand.
Okay.
I'd like to leave for you a quote by Major Conwell, retiree of the United States Marine Corps. And I am for HB 114, and I feel that it deserves its teeth, so when federal agents do attempt to come in, that we can stand against them. And I don't want it to go that way. I want to be loving and peaceful, but we need to have our teeth and defend ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Crozier. Okay, the remainders, you've got to make it extremely brief so that these people that want to make their statement can make their statement. So, anybody else against? Okay. Next one, you're for?
I'm Martin Ricks. I'm for.
Okay.
What has motivated me to come here today was primarily the letter that the Utah Sheriff's Association sent to President Obama, stating essentially what House Bill 114 states, and that is that if any law is passed in an unconstitutional manner, they will not enforce it. That was the brightest spot of hope that I've had in a good long time, and then followed up by HB 114, that the gentleman who was talking about the superiority clause of the federal law seems to forget the 10th Amendment and the enumerated power clause, which has been trashed for many, many years. We have the federal government actually in our schools today telling us what we can feed our children. Tell me in the Constitution where that falls properly under the enumerated powers. And that's a small thing. We're talking here about the right to defend ourselves. I find it highly ironic that a federal government, which disobeys its own laws in so many areas, for example, the federal Senate has not passed a budget in 4 years. They pass laws on me that I'm supposed to obey. They ignore constitutional laws every day. It's time for the states to make a stand. HB 114 is a great start.
Thank you, Mr. Ricks. We've got to hurry because we got to get to the floor. I'm going to give you just a brief second to tell me your name. Tell me, you got to make this extremely brief.
My name is Siri Davidson. I represent myself, my husband who is at work, and any and all Utahns that are patriotic. That's who I represent. I would like to read a quick poem if I may. It's very short.
It's got to be extremely short.
Okay, good. I'll read fast. Why do we have an army in America? To protect our liberty. Why do we have a navy in America? To secure and keep us free. Why do we have an air force in America? To inspire our confidence. Why do we have the service called the Marines? To help ensure our national defense. They're called the military. These people on parade. They're most extraordinary and oh so very brave. We need the military on the land, the sea, the sky. We know they're necessary, and we know the reason why. Why do we have an army in America, over hill, over dale, as we hit the dusty trail, to protect our liberty? Why do we have a navy in America? Anchors away, my boys,
to secure and keep us free? Why do we have an Air Force in America? Off we go into the wild blue yonder to inspire our confidence. Why do we have the service called the Marines from the hills of Montezuma to ensure our national defense? I want to thank you all here today who serve us, the public. I want to thank these people out here for taking time off work and doing whatever they had to get here. Because my liberty, my freedom, and my Second Amendment mean everything to me.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else against? If not, come up. For. You're for? Come up.
Hello, my name is Robert Stevens. I'm for. In 1787, as Benjamin Franklin was walking out, a woman approached him and said, "Sir, what have you?" And he said, "A constitution, a republic, if you can keep it." Interestingly enough, in 1830, a book was released. It was called the Book of Mormon, and it told us how to keep it. It pointed out that entire civilizations, it named the Nephites, and the Amalekites, and the Jaredites, were destroyed by what they called secret societies, which used their influence and rose into the power of government. I want to bring home what was discussed before on democide. If you Google democide, University of Hawaii, you can see a breakdown of the stats. It turns out there's actually 262 million humans which were massacred by the government in the 20th century. If I bring that home further, if we stretch humans from head to foot to between Logan and Utah, all 4 lanes one way, we'd have to stack the bodies 500 high. Now, I hope that helps awake everybody into how serious the encroachment of an executive institution or branch is on the public. In the Obama administration alone, he's racked up an additional $5.8 trillion. If you take the matter for...
Mr. Stevenson, I've got 4 more people I've got to hear from real quickly.
Now, if we stack up all those $1, again, from Logan to Provo, it'd be 1,133,181 high, all 4 lanes of I-15.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else against? If not, next 4.
My name's Benjamin Hess, and I'm representing myself. When I was growing up, I was always taught to serve God, serve country, serve family in that order. And the reason for that order is because if you neglect your country and your government, at some point in time, you will have to defend your family against them. And unfortunately, that is basically what this bill is doing. We have gotten to the point where we've neglected ourselves to the point that we are now having to defend our families against government entities. And I think it's sad that we're there, but I think this bill will be helpful in that fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. Anybody else against? Not the next one 4.
Well, lucky for you all, I'm not a speaker and I'm not a writer. This will be short and sweet.
Okay, give us your name and who you represent.
Brett Butler, represent myself, my family, my friends.
Okay.
The reason for I've always voted, but I've never been political. The reason for my new motivation is clear. We are overwhelmed with failed leadership. We are led from one crisis to another with neither side willing to compromise, negotiate, or in my opinion, represent the best interests of myself and my family. Officials in Washington refuse to consider anything that sidesteps from their agenda, their lobbyists, or the big money that supports them. There has also never been a time in my life when the ideals or directions of D.C. wishes for our country differ so much from my own. I am not alone in these thoughts or feelings. We do have a voice, and it is through our local elected officials, you on this committee and those on the House floor. What this bill means to me and many others is that we do not agree with the power grab in Washington. We will not be bullied any longer by thug politics in D.C. This country is divided, and we the people have a voice. We have rights given to us by our forefathers who fought and died to give us those rights. Utah and all states where the majority feels like we are being pushed aside need to stand up and support any and all legislature that expresses the will of the majority of the people.
Okay, that's, Mr. Butler, I got these other two I got to finish with.
Well, that's about it anyway, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I encourage you to vote for this bill.
My name is Seth Porter. I'm for this bill, and I'm representing myself. I didn't come prepared with any remarks or anything. I just want to express my support for this bill and express my belief that gun-grabbing politicians like Senator Feinstein of California and President Obama aren't going to stop with the proposed gun control legislation that they've proposed, that they're going to continue to infringe on our Second Amendment rights, and HB 114 is a step that Utah can take to defend our rights and say that we will not subject ourselves to these infringements on our rights, that we will take a stand, and that you can't tread on us. Thank you, and I urge you to throw your support behind this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. I got one last person that was in line there. We'll hear from him, and then that's it. Anybody else against? Okay, last one for. Thank you.
My name is John Phelps. I represent myself. I came with actually no intention to speak, but I have 2 points. The first is people taking their cues from the Democratic leadership in Washington are taking their cues from somebody, specifically Joe Biden, who's advocated breaking the law by shooting a weapon indiscriminately and by violating several gun safety rules, proving he has absolutely no concept of how to deal with firearms, referencing his advice to his wife to fire a shotgun off a balcony. The other point is that there's been a lot of debate here about the constitutionality of this bill. That's why we have a Supreme Court. If every single bill was constitutional, no bills would get struck down, no laws would get struck down. The people of Utah have spoken, and they want this bill. I want this bill. If it is not constitutional, the courts will decide.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. All right, we've had exhausted the public comments at this point. I have one thing from Representative Hutchings.
Just a very quick comment, Mr. Chair, for the public. It's important for you guys to know we're not trying to cut you short. We are not allowed, once the floor time starts at 10 o'clock, we are not allowed to do anything in this committee meeting. So we have no choice but to adjourn at the minute that the floor time starts. So please don't think that we're trying to rush out of here. Those are our rules. We have no choice but to be done before that time hits. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. With the public comments exhausted, back to the committee. At this point, from what I've been told, we really can't take any action at this point because we're past 9:50 is what I've been told, but I don't. And if there's somebody question that, I think that's where we're at. If there's any concluding comments at this point, that's really where we're at this point from what I've been instructed as far as the rules go. Any concluding comments we need to make in this meeting? If not, there's one last motion I can accept at this point. Yes.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
It's non-debatable. All in favor? Aye. Motion is accepted unanimously. We're adjourned.